The dust swirled around Samuel Morrison's boots as he approached the makeshift trading post outside Fort Defiance. The year was 1868, and the New Mexico territory stretched endlessly under a merciless sun that had already claimed too many good men. Samuel wasn't here for the usual business of cattle or supplies. He was here because of a letter that had arrived 3 weeks ago, written in his brother's shaky handwriting before cholera took him. "There's a girl," the letter had said. "Apache, being held by traders who don't understand what they have. She saved my life once, Samuel. If something happens to me, find her. Make it right." Samuel had ridden hard from Colorado, following rumors and whispers, until they led him here. The trading post was nothing more than adobe walls and desperate men trying to make money from other people's misery. As he tied his horse to the hitching post, he could hear voices arguing inside. The door creaked as he pushed it open. 3 men stood around a table covered with whiskey bottles and playing cards. In the corner, sitting on a wooden crate with her wrists bound, was the most striking woman Samuel had ever seen. Her dark hair fell like a waterfall over her shoulders, and her eyes held a fire that hadn't been extinguished, despite her circumstances. She was Apache, that much was clear from her features, and the traditional patterns still visible on her torn dress. "You hear about the girl?" asked the largest of the 3 men. His name was Dutch Carson, and his reputation for cruelty preceded him wherever he went. "She's prime goods, this one. Speaks English better than most white folk. Smart as a whip, too. Been teaching her to read and write, making her more valuable by the day." Samuel's jaw tightened. The way Dutch spoke about her made his stomach turn, but he kept his expression neutral. "What are you asking?" $500, Dutch said with a grin that showed his gold teeth. "And that's a bargain for what you're getting. This one's got spirit, but she can be broken proper with the right hand." The woman's eyes met Samuel's across the room. There was no pleading in her gaze, no desperate hope. Instead, there was something that looked like curiosity mixed with defiance. She was studying him the same way he might study a dangerous animal, trying to determine if he was a threat or an opportunity. "Her name's Ayanna," said one of the other men, a thin fellow with nervous hands. "Means eternal blossom or some such. Fancy name for an Indian, if you ask me." "Nobody asked you, Pete," Dutch snapped. Then he turned back to Samuel. "So what do you say, stranger? You got $500? Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch heavy with coins. "I've got the money, but first I want to know how you came by her." Dutch's eyes gleamed at the sight of the money. "Fair question. We found her with a group of Apache who'd been raiding settlements. Most of them got away when the cavalry showed up, but she got thrown from her horse. Had a bad knock to the head. When she came to, she was our guest." Samuel knew there was more to the story than Dutch was telling, but pressing for details wouldn't help anyone. The important thing was getting Ayanna away from these men before they sold her to someone worse. "She cause you any trouble?" Samuel asked, still watching Ayanna's face. "Nothing we couldn't handle." Dutch laughed, but Samuel noticed the fresh scratches on the man's arms. "Though I wouldn't turn your back on her if I were you. Apache women can be vicious when cornered." Samuel counted out the coins slowly, making sure Dutch could see each one. The sound of gold hitting the wooden table filled the room. Ayanna's expression didn't change, but Samuel caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "There's your 500, Samuel said. "Cut her loose." Dutch pocketed the coins quickly, then pulled out a knife and approached Ayanna. She didn't flinch as he cut the ropes around her wrists, even though Samuel could see the raw marks where the bindings had chafed her skin. "She's all yours, friend," Dutch said. "But let me give you some advice. Keep her tied up until you get where you're going. These Apache, they're like wild horses. Give them an inch of freedom, and they'll run for the horizon." Samuel ignored the advice and approached Ayanna slowly. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he'd first thought, probably no more than 25. There was a small scar on her left temple where something had struck her, and her hands bore the calluses of someone who worked hard for survival. "Miss Ayanna," he said quietly. "My name is Samuel Morrison. Your friend Thomas was my brother." The change in her expression was immediate. The defiance softened into something like grief, and she spoke for the first time since he'd entered the room. "Thomas Morrison died 3 moons ago," she said in perfect English, her voice carrying a slight accent that made the words sound like music. "He spoke of a brother who lived in the mountains of Colorado. He said this brother was a good man who treated all people with respect." "That would be me," Samuel said. "Thomas wrote to me before he died. He told me about you, about how you saved his life. He asked me to find you if anything happened to him." Dutch was growing impatient. "This is all very touching, but you've got your purchase. Time to move along." Samuel turned and fixed Dutch with a stare that had made stronger men reconsider their positions. "Her name is Ayanna. She's not a purchase. She's a person who deserves respect." "Whatever you say, friend. Just take your business elsewhere." Samuel offered his arm to Ayanna, but she stood on her own, moving with a grace that spoke of years spent in mountains and desert. Together they walked toward the door. "Miss," Dutch called after them, "you might want to know that there's Apache looking for her. Word is her father's offering a reward for her return. Might be worth more than $500 if you catch my meaning." Samuel stopped, but didn't turn around. "What kind of reward?" "Horses, silver, safe passage through Apache territory. Her father's some kind of chief or medicine man. Important fellow, from what we hear." This information changed everything. If Ayanna's father was looking for her, then returning her to her people would be the right thing to do. But it also meant traveling through dangerous territory where white men weren't always welcome. Outside the trading post, Samuel and Ayanna stood in the afternoon heat. His horse, a sturdy bay named Thunder, waited patiently at the hitching rail. "Where will you take me?" Ayanna asked. "That depends," Samuel replied. "Where do you want to go?" The question seemed to surprise her. "You are asking what I want?" "Thomas said you saved his life. That makes you family in my book. Family gets to choose their own path." For the first time, Ayanna's stern expression cracked slightly. "You are not what I expected when I saw you count out that money." "What did you expect?" "Another man who would treat me like property. Another man who would try to break my spirit and make me forget who I am." Samuel pulled Thunder's reins free and turned to face her fully. "I've got a ranch in Colorado. It's not much, but it's peaceful. You're welcome there for as long as you need. Or if you prefer, I can try to get word to your people about where you are." "My people believe I am dead," Ayanna said quietly. "When the cavalry attacked our camp, many were killed. Those who escaped assumed the worst when they could not find me." "Then maybe it's time to let them know you're alive." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, studying Samuel's face as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, she spoke. "There is a place 3 days' ride north of here where my people sometimes make camp during the summer months. If my father still lives, word can be sent to him there." "Then that's where we'll go," Samuel said. "But first we need supplies. This journey won't be easy." They rode into the small town of Gallup as the sun was beginning to sink toward the western mountains. The streets were dusty and mostly empty except for a few cowboys and merchants closing up their shops for the day. Samuel could feel the stares as they passed. A white man traveling with an Apache woman was unusual enough to draw attention, and not all of it friendly. At the general store, Samuel bought supplies for the journey: dried meat, beans, coffee, and extra ammunition. The storekeeper, an elderly man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions but packed everything carefully. "You'll want to be careful traveling north," the old man said quietly as Samuel paid. "There's been trouble with raiders." "Not Apache," he added quickly, glancing at Ayanna. White men pretending to be Apache, attacking settlements and then disappearing. It's got everyone on edge. Thanks for the warning, Samuel said. As they prepared to leave town, Ayanna spoke up. There is something you should know before we go further. Samuel looked at her expectantly. I did not just save your brother's life once. I saved it 3 times. The first was when he was shot by raiders and I nursed him back to health. The second was when he was bitten by a rattlesnake and I knew which plants would draw out the poison. The third was when he was captured by enemies of my people who would have tortured him to death. Why are you telling me this? Because each time I helped him, I asked for nothing in return. But now I must ask something of you. Samuel waited for her to continue. My people have been driven from their lands, hunted like animals, forced to live on reservations where they slowly die of heartbreak and disease. If you truly want to honor your brother's memory, you will help me do more than just return to my father. You will help me find a way to protect what remains of my people. The weight of her request settled on Samuel's shoulders. He'd come here thinking he was rescuing one woman from an unfortunate situation. Now he was being asked to involve himself in something much larger and more dangerous. What exactly are you asking me to do? I do not know yet, but I believe the spirits brought you to that trading post today for a reason. My brother Thomas saw something in you worth trusting. Perhaps together we can find a way to build bridges instead of walls. As they rode out of Gallup under a sky painted with sunset colors, Samuel found himself thinking about his brother's letter. Thomas had always been the idealistic one, the brother who believed that people could overcome their differences if they just tried hard enough. Maybe that idealism had rubbed off on the Apache woman who had saved his life. The trail north would take them through some of the most dangerous territory in the Southwest. There would be challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But as he watched Ayanna ride beside him with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, Samuel realized he was looking forward to discovering what those challenges might teach them both. The first day of their journey ended at a waterhole surrounded by cottonwood trees. As they made camp, Samuel noticed how Ayanna moved through the tasks of survival with practiced efficiency. She gathered firewood, found the best spot for their bedrolls, and identified which plants growing nearby might be useful for food or medicine. You've done this before, Samuel observed. Apache children learn to survive in the wilderness before they learn to walk properly, Ayanna replied. It is necessary when your people have been wanderers for generations. That night, as they sat by their small fire under a canopy of stars, Ayanna told Samuel stories about her people. She spoke of the sacred mountains where the spirits lived, of warriors who could disappear into the landscape like smoke, and of women who knew the secrets of every plant that grew in the desert. In return, Samuel told her about his ranch in Colorado, about the cattle he raised, and the quiet life he'd built for himself after the war ended. He found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, about the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the middle of the night, about the loneliness that had driven him to accept almost any excuse to leave his mountain home. Why did you never marry? Ayanna asked. Never found the right woman, I suppose. Most ladies don't take kindly to a man who prefers the company of cattle to people. Perhaps you simply had not met a woman who understood the value of silence and solitude. There was something in her tone that made Samuel look at her more closely, but her face was hidden in shadow on the other side of the fire. As the night grew deeper and the fire burned down to coals, they prepared to sleep. Samuel offered Ayanna his bedroll, but she declined, saying she preferred to sleep on the bare ground as her ancestors had done. Samuel Morrison, she said as they settled down for the night. Yes? Thank you for treating me as a person worthy of choice. It has been many months since anyone has shown me such respect. You don't need to thank me for that. It's just the right thing to do. Perhaps. But many people do not choose to do the right thing when it costs them something. Samuel thought about the $500 he'd paid to Dutch Carson. It was a significant sum, enough to buy good breeding stock for his ranch or make improvements to his property. But lying here under the stars, listening to the night sounds of the desert, he knew he'd made the right choice. Tomorrow they would continue north toward the summer camping grounds of Ayanna's people. Samuel had no idea what they would find there, or whether Ayanna's father was even still alive. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something important, something that might actually make a difference in the world. As sleep began to claim him, Samuel heard Ayanna singing softly in her native language. The melody was haunting and beautiful, like nothing he'd ever heard before. It spoke of longing and hope, of connections that transcended the boundaries people built between themselves. In his dreams that night, Samuel saw mountains covered with pine trees and meadows full of wildflowers. But most clearly, he saw Ayanna's face as she'd looked when he asked her what she wanted. The surprise in her eyes had been replaced by something else, something that looked like the beginning of trust. The second day brought clouds that promised rain, but delivered only false hope. Samuel and Ayanna rode through country that grew more rugged with each mile, following game trails that wound between red rock formations and stands of juniper trees. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, but Samuel could see why travelers avoided this route when they had other options. Ayanna proved to be an excellent guide, reading the land like other people read books. She knew which water sources were reliable, where to find shelter if storms came, and how to spot the signs that other travelers had passed this way recently. "There," she said around midday, pointing to a cluster of rocks ahead. "We should stop there and rest the horses. But we must be careful. Someone has been watching us since sunrise." Samuel's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. "You're sure? I have seen the sun reflect off metal 3 times from the same position on that ridge behind us. Someone with a spyglass or the barrel of a gun is following at a distance." They rode toward the rocks casually, not wanting to show their pursuer that they knew he was there. Once they were hidden among the boulders, Samuel climbed up high enough to get a view of their back trail. "I see him," he said when he climbed back down. "One man on a paint horse staying about a mile back. Could be one of Dutch's friends looking for trouble. Or it could be someone who knows there is a reward for returning me to my people," Ayanna said. "Dutch Carson is not the type of man to let $500 ride away without trying to get more profit from the situation." Samuel checked his weapons and made sure Thunder was ready to run if necessary. "What do you think we should do?" "We could try to lose him in the rocks ahead. This country has many hidden canyons and cave systems, but if he knows this area well, we might only trap ourselves. Or," Ayanna's smile was sharp as a knife blade, "or we could let him follow us a little closer and then have a conversation about his intentions." Samuel found himself grinning back at her. "You have a plan. Apache women learn to hunt just like Apache men. Sometimes the prey thinks it is hunting the hunter." They rode on, maintaining their pace but keeping watch for good ambush spots. Ayanna led them into a narrow canyon where the walls rose high on both sides. About halfway through, she dismounted and handed Thunder's reins to Samuel. "Keep riding for another few minutes, then find a place to hide the horses. I will be waiting here when our friend arrives. I don't like leaving you alone." "I will not be alone. This canyon is full of spirits that protect those who fight for justice." Samuel wanted to argue, but something in Ayanna's expression stopped him. This was her country, and she knew it better than he ever could. Reluctantly, he rode on. 10 minutes later, he heard voices echoing off the canyon walls. One was definitely their pursuer, and the tone suggested he was not pleased with his current situation. Samuel tied the horses securely and made his way back on foot. He found Ayanna standing in the middle of the canyon trail with her arms crossed. Their pursuer sat on his horse about 20 feet away, but his hands were raised in surrender. His rifle lay on the ground halfway between them. "What's the situation?" Samuel asked as he approached. "This man says his name is Jake Wilson," Ayanna replied without taking her eyes off the stranger. "He says he is not working for Dutch Carson. He says he has a message for you." Jake Wilson was a small, nervous man with the look of someone who spent more time in saloons than saddles. His clothes were too clean for someone who made his living on the frontier, and his horse showed signs of being ridden hard. "I'm listening," Samuel said. "Man named Carlton Reed sent me," Jake said quickly. "He heard about your business at the trading post and wants to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "Mr. Reed has interests in mining and railroad development. He's always looking for people who know how to handle negotiations with the Apache. He heard you just bought yourself an Apache woman, and he thought you might be interested in expanding that kind of business." Samuel felt his anger rising, but Ayanna placed a hand on his arm before he could speak. "What exactly is Mr. Reed proposing?" she asked, in a voice that could have frozen water. "Well, he's got contracts with the government to supply workers for various projects, railroad building, mining operations, that sort of thing. There's good money in it, especially if you know how to acquire the right kind of labor." The full horror of what Jake was suggesting hit Samuel like a physical blow. Carlton Reed wasn't interested in legitimate business. He was running some kind of slave operation, targeting Native Americans who could be captured and forced to work. "Let me make sure I understand," Samuel said slowly. "Reed wants me to capture Apache people and sell them to him as workers." "It's all legal," Jake said hastily. "The government's got laws about prisoners of war and such. Long as the paperwork's done right, nobody asks too many questions." Ayanna stepped closer to Jake's horse. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had never learned to doubt her own power. "Tell me, Jake Wilson, do you have children?" "What's that got to do with anything?" "Answer the question." "Yeah. I got 2 kids back in Denver." "Would you sell them to Carlton Reed if the price was right? Would you tell yourself it was legal business while strangers worked your children to death in some mine?" Jake's face went pale. "That's different. My kids are white." "No," Ayanna said quietly. "That is not different at all. That is exactly the same." Samuel picked up Jake's rifle and ejected all the cartridges. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride back to Carlton Reed and tell him that Samuel Morrison is not interested in his business. You're going to tell him that if any of his people come looking for me or for Ayanna, they'll wish they hadn't. Mr. Reed ain't going to like that message. Then maybe Mr. Reed should find a new line of work." Jake gathered his reins nervously. "You're making a mistake, Morrison. Reed's got connections with the territorial government. He can make life difficult for people who cross him." "Let him try," Samuel said. "But tell him one more thing. Tell him that the Apache woman he heard about isn't my property. She's my partner. And partners look out for each other." After Jake rode away, Samuel and Ayanna continued through the canyon in thoughtful silence. The encounter had revealed something ugly about the world they were moving through, but it had also clarified something important about their relationship. "Partner," Ayanna said eventually, "is that all right with you? I have never been anyone's partner before. Apache women are respected, but we are not usually considered equals in decision-making with men from outside our tribe." "Well, you're Thomas's sister as far as I'm concerned. That makes you my sister too, if you'll have it. And I've never known a sister who wasn't at least as smart as her brothers." They made camp that evening in a hidden meadow surrounded by pine trees. A small stream provided fresh water, and there was good grass for the horses. For the first time since leaving Gallup, they felt safe enough to build a proper fire and cook a hot meal. As they ate, Ayanna told Samuel more about her family and her people's current situation. "My father is called Nal Nish, which means he works. He is not a war chief, but a peace chief who tries to find ways for our people to survive without constant fighting. When I was taken, he was working with Indian agents to negotiate better conditions on the reservation. What kind of conditions? Food that is not spoiled, medicine for the sick, teachers who will help our children learn to read and write English while still honoring Apache traditions. He believes that adaptation is the only path to survival. Samuel could hear the conflict in her voice. But you're not sure he's right. I have seen what happens to Apache who trust too much in the promises of white officials. They become dependent, lose their strength, forget who they are. But I have also seen what happens to those who choose only the path of war. They die fighting, and their children grow up as orphans. Maybe there's a third path. What kind of third path? Samuel poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the dark sky. Maybe the answer isn't choosing between fighting and surrendering. Maybe it's finding a way to build something new that honors the best of both worlds. You sound like Thomas when he talked about his dreams for the future. What kind of dreams? Ayanna was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. He used to say that he could imagine a day when Apache children and white children played together without fear, when Apache knowledge of the land could help white farmers grow better crops, when white medicine could save Apache lives, and Apache wisdom could heal white hearts. That sounds like a good dream. It sounds like an impossible dream. There is too much hatred, too much fear, too much blood that has been spilled. Maybe. But impossible dreams have a way of becoming possible when the right people decide to make them real. On the third day, they reached the area where Ayanna hoped to find signs of her people's summer camp. The terrain here was different from the desert country they had been traveling through. Pine and aspen trees covered the mountainsides, and there were meadows full of wildflowers. Ayanna read the landscape like a scout reading tracks. She pointed out old fire rings where her people had camped in previous years, places where horses had grazed, trees that had been marked with symbols that carried meaning for those who knew how to interpret them. "There," she said, as they topped a ridge in the late afternoon. "Smoke." Samuel squinted in the direction she was pointing and saw a thin column of smoke rising from a valley about 2 miles away. "Could be your people?" "Could be, or could be cavalry or miners or anyone. We must be very careful now." They approached slowly, using the trees for cover. As they got closer, Samuel could see that the smoke was coming from a small camp with 3 wickiups, traditional Apache dwellings made from wooden frames covered with brush and hides. "I know this place," Ayanna said softly. "My uncle sometimes brings his family here to gather acorns and hunt deer. If he is here, he will know where to find my father." They were still 100 yards from the camp when a voice called out in Apache. Ayanna answered in the same language, and Samuel heard the joy in her voice even though he couldn't understand the words. A man emerged from one of the wickiups. He was perhaps 50 years old, with gray streaking his long black hair and the weathered face of someone who had lived his entire life in the mountains. When he saw Ayanna, his expression changed from caution to amazement. The reunion was emotional, but brief. After the initial greetings, Ayanna's uncle looked at Samuel with obvious curiosity. Ayanna spoke to him in Apache, presumably explaining who Samuel was and how they had met. The uncle nodded and then spoke to Samuel in accented but clear English. "I am called Goyakla. Ayanna says you are the brother of Thomas Morrison, the white man who was friend to our people. She says you bought her freedom from bad men and asked for nothing in return." "That's right," Samuel said. "Thomas Morrison was a good man. He helped my nephew when he was sick with the wasting disease. He never asked for payment, never tried to take advantage of our troubles. If you are truly his brother, you are welcome at our fire." That evening, as they sat around Goyakla's fire eating deer meat and acorn bread, Samuel learned more about the current state of Ayanna's people. The official Apache reservation was overcrowded and short of supplies. Many families had left to try to make their own way in the mountains, risking arrest by the cavalry but choosing freedom over slow starvation. Nalnish, Ayana's father, is trying to negotiate with new Indian agent, Goyakla explained. Agent's name is Henderson, and he seems different from others. He listens when Apache speak, tries to understand our needs, but he is only one man fighting against system that wants us to disappear. Where can we find him? Ayana asked. He travels between reservation and various camps trying to keep peace. Last I heard, he was at the trading post near Sunrise Springs, about 1 day's ride east of here. Samuel and Ayana exchanged glances. Another trading post meant more men like Dutch Carson, more opportunities for trouble. We'll leave in the morning, Samuel said. I will send my son Chato with you, Goyakla offered. He knows the way, and 3 riders are safer than 2 in that country. Chato was a young man about 20 years old, with his father's steady gaze and his own natural confidence. He spoke excellent English and had obviously spent time around white communities. I went to school at the mission for 3 years, he explained to Samuel. Learned to read and write, learned about white man's laws and customs. Knowledge is a weapon that can be used for defense as well as attack. As they prepared to leave Goyakla's camp, the older man pulled Samuel aside. Ayana is special woman, he said quietly. She has gift for seeing connections between things that other people think are separate. Among our people, she would be called a bridge walker, someone who can move between worlds without losing her balance. What are you telling me? I am telling you that the spirits brought you together for a purpose larger than either of you understands yet. Ayana's heart has been closed since the death of her husband 2 years ago. But I see in her eyes tonight something I have not seen since before that sorrow came to her. Samuel felt heat rise in his face. I don't know what you're suggesting. I am suggesting nothing. I am only observing. But be careful with her trust, Samuel Morrison. She has given it to few people in her life. The conversation left Samuel with much to think about as they rode toward Sunrise Springs the next morning. He found himself watching Ayana differently, noticing the way she moved with natural grace, the way she listened to conversations with complete attention, the way she seemed to understand things that weren't spoken aloud. He was beginning to realize that what had started as a simple mission to honor his brother's last request was becoming something much more complicated. And as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, he wasn't sure whether that complication was something to embrace or something to fear. The trading post near Sunrise Springs was nothing like the rough establishment where Samuel had first encountered Dutch Carson. This was a legitimate business run by a man named Murphy, who treated all his customers with equal respect, whether they were white, Apache, or Mexican. The presence of several Apache families around the trading post suggested that Agent Henderson had indeed established a different kind of relationship with the local tribes. Samuel, Ayana, and Chato arrived in the late afternoon to find a small crowd gathered around a man in a dark suit who was speaking earnestly to a mixed group of Apache leaders and white settlers. This had to be Agent Henderson, and from the intensity of the conversation, he was dealing with some kind of crisis. "What's happening?" Ayana asked an elderly Apache woman who was listening from the edge of the crowd. "Soldiers came this morning," the woman replied in English. "They say there has been attack on wagon train 20 miles south. They say Apache did this thing, and they want to arrest every Apache man in the area." Samuel could see the tension in the crowd. The Apache men stood with their hands near their weapons, ready to fight if necessary. The white settlers looked nervous and uncertain. Agent Henderson was trying to maintain peace, but the situation felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. "Agent Henderson," called a voice from the crowd. Samuel turned to see a cavalry officer approaching with 6 mounted soldiers. "I'm Captain Williams from Fort Defiance. I have orders to arrest the Apache leaders here for questioning about the wagon train attack." Henderson stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Captain, I've told you already. The Apache families here have been camped around this trading post for the past week. They couldn't have attacked any wagon train 20 miles south." "That may be, but my orders are clear. I'm to bring in all Apache men for questioning." Samuel could see that the situation was about to explode. The Apache men were outnumbered by the soldiers, but they wouldn't go quietly. Innocent people were about to die because of fear and misunderstanding. Then Ayanna stepped into the center of the crowd. "Captain Williams," she said in a clear voice that carried to everyone present, "before you start arresting innocent people, perhaps you should ask yourself who benefits from an attack that gets blamed on the Apache." The captain turned to stare at her. "And who are you to question military orders?" "I am Ayanna, daughter of Nalnish, and I have information about who really attacked that wagon train." The crowd went silent. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. What was Ayanna doing? "3 days ago, a man named Carlton Reed sent a messenger to us with an offer to buy Apache people as workers for his mining operations. When we refused, the messenger threatened that Reed would make trouble for anyone who crossed him." Agent Henderson stepped closer. "Are you saying Carlton Reed was behind the wagon train attack?" "I am saying that Carlton Reed has reason to want the Apache blamed for crimes they did not commit. If all the Apache in this area are arrested or driven away, who will be left to work in his mines? Who will be left to complain when people start disappearing?" Captain Williams looked confused. "I don't know anything about any Carlton Reed. I only know that a wagon train was attacked and the survivors said it was Apache." "Describe these survivors," Chato said, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. "3 men said they were traveling from Santa Fe to Albuquerque with trade goods." Samuel and Ayanna exchanged glances. "Captain," Samuel said, stepping forward, "I'm Samuel Morrison. 3 days ago, one of Carlton Reed's men approached me about going into business with him. The business was capturing Apache people to work in mines and railroad construction." "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Morrison." "Yes, it is. And if you're smart, you'll investigate it before you arrest people who might be able to help you find the real criminals." Agent Henderson spoke up. "Captain, I know Samuel Morrison's reputation. His brother Thomas was a trusted friend to the Apache people. If he says Carlton Reed is involved in something illegal, it deserves investigation." The captain was clearly uncomfortable with the way the situation was developing. "Even if this Reed fellow is involved somehow, I still have my orders." "Then let me make you a deal," Ayanna said. "Give me 24 hours to prove that Apache did not attack that wagon train. If I cannot provide proof, the Apache leaders here will surrender themselves for questioning." "And if you can prove it, then you will help us arrest the real criminals." The captain thought for a long moment. 24 hours. But I'm posting guards around this camp. Nobody leaves without my permission." As the crowd dispersed, Samuel pulled Ayanna aside. "What are you planning?" "I am planning to visit the site of this wagon train attack and see what the evidence really shows." "The captain said no one leaves camp." Ayanna smiled. "The captain said no one leaves without his permission. He did not say he would refuse to give permission for a reasonable request." An hour later, Samuel found himself riding south with Ayanna, Chato, Agent Henderson, and Captain Williams. The captain had agreed to investigate the attack site after Henderson convinced him that having Apache trackers along would make it easier to follow any trail left by the real attackers. They reached the site of the attack just as the sun was setting. The remains of 3 wagons were scattered across the trail, and there were signs that several people had died here. But as Ayanna and Chato examined the ground around the wagons, they found evidence that told a different story than the one the survivors had given. "Look at these horse tracks," Chato said, pointing to clear impressions in the dirt. "These horses wear iron shoes. Apache ponies do not wear shoes." "And here," Ayanna added, kneeling beside some disturbed earth. "Blood, but not from the fight." This blood is from someone who was already wounded when he arrived here. She stood and walked to where several arrows were stuck in the sides of the wagons. Agent Henderson followed her, and Samuel could see his expression grow grim as Ayanna pointed out details in the arrows. "These arrows were made by white men trying to copy Apache work," Henderson said. "The fletching is wrong, the points are the wrong shape, and they're bound with rope instead of sinew." Captain Williams examined one of the arrows himself. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've seen real Apache arrows, and I've seen fake ones before. There are people who make fake Apache weapons specifically to use in attacks like this one." As they searched the area more thoroughly, the evidence became overwhelming. The attackers had been white men on shod horses, using fake Apache weapons and tactics they'd learned from books rather than experience. They'd killed the people in the wagon train, stolen what they wanted, and left false evidence to blame the Apache. "The question now," Samuel said as they prepared to camp for the night, "is how we prove that Carlton Reed was behind it." "We follow the trail," Chato said simply. "The men who did this were not skilled at hiding their tracks. They left a path that even a white man could follow." The next morning, they followed the trail left by the real attackers. It led northeast toward mining country, just as Ayanna had predicted. By midday, they had found the attackers' camp, and the evidence there was even more damning. "Reed's Mining Company," Agent Henderson read from a wooden crate that had been abandoned near the cold campfire. "Property of Carlton Reed." They also found the personal belongings of the wagon train victims, including letters and papers that proved these people had been legitimate travelers, not the suspicious characters Reed's men had claimed when they reported the attack. Captain Williams was now fully convinced, but he was also worried. If Reed is behind this, he's got connections with the territorial government. Arresting him won't be simple. "Then we don't arrest him," Samuel said. "We expose him." "How?" "Agent Henderson, how many newspapers are there in Santa Fe?" 3 or 4. "Why?" "Because a story about a mining company staging fake Apache attacks to justify illegal labor practices would sell a lot of papers, especially if it came with evidence and witnesses." By the time they returned to the trading post, they had a plan. Agent Henderson would contact newspaper editors in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Captain Williams would report the truth about the wagon train attack to his superiors. And Samuel would make sure that Carlton Reed's illegal recruiting operations became public knowledge. But first, there was a reunion that had been postponed too long. Nalnish arrived at the trading post just as the sun was setting on their second day there. Samuel knew immediately that this was Ayanna's father, not just from the resemblance, but from the way Ayanna's entire demeanor changed when she saw him. The Apache leader was a man of perhaps 60 years, with silver hair braided with leather and beads. His face was lined with the marks of someone who had seen much sorrow, but his eyes were bright with intelligence and compassion. When he embraced his daughter, Samuel could see tears on both their faces. The conversation that followed was conducted partly in Apache and partly in English, as Ayanna told her father everything that had happened since her capture. Nalnish listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. Finally, he turned to Samuel. "Thomas Morrison's brother," he said in careful English. "My daughter tells me you bought her freedom and asked for nothing in return. She tells me you treated her with respect and called her your partner. This is a great gift you have given to my family." "Your daughter saved my brother's life 3 times, Samuel replied. "The debt was mine to pay." "Perhaps, but paying a debt and honoring a spirit are different things. You have honored her spirit, and through her, the spirit of our people." That evening, as the various groups around the trading post shared food and stories, Samuel found himself in conversation with Nalnish about the future. "Agent Henderson is a good man," the Apache leader said. "But he is fighting against a system that wants us to disappear. Even if we expose Carlton Reed and others like him, There will always be more men who see us as obstacles to their profits. What's the alternative? I have been thinking about this for many years. The old ways are dying, whether we like it or not. But perhaps the death of old ways can lead to the birth of new ways. Samuel waited for him to continue. There is land in the mountains of Colorado where Apache could live in peace, land where we could raise horses and cattle, grow crops that feed our families, teach our children to read and write, while still honoring Apache traditions. But such a place would need someone who understands both worlds, someone who could help us build bridges instead of walls. The conversation was interrupted by Ayanna, who had been talking with other women around the fire. "Father," she said, "I need to speak with you privately." Samuel excused himself and walked to the edge of the firelight. In the distance, he could see the mountains of Colorado rising against the stars. Somewhere up there was his ranch, the quiet life he'd built for himself after the war. It would be easy to go back to that life, to pretend that his brief journey into Ayanna's world had been just an adventure. But he knew he couldn't do that. Too much had changed, both in him and in the world around him. The isolation that had once seemed like peace now felt like cowardice. When Ayanna returned from her conversation with her father, she found Samuel standing alone under the stars. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about legacies," Samuel replied. "My brother Thomas wanted to build something better than what he found when he came west. He never got the chance to see that dream become real. And you want to finish what he started?" "Maybe. Or maybe I want to start something new that honors what he believed in." Ayanna was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "My father has offered to adopt you into our clan if you are willing. It would make you legally Apache in the eyes of our people, with all the rights and responsibilities that come with such kinship." Samuel felt his heart start beating faster. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you would be family. It means you would have a voice in decisions that affect our people. It means you would have a responsibility to help protect and provide for the children and elders of the clan." "And what do you think about your father's offer?" "I think," Ayanna said slowly, "that Thomas Morrison would be proud to know that his brother chose to honor his memory by building bridges between worlds." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally, Samuel spoke. "There's something I need to ask you." "Ask." "If I accept your father's offer, if I try to build the kind of place your father described, would you help me? Would you be my partner in something bigger than just surviving?" Ayanna turned to face him fully. In the starlight, her face was beautiful in a way that took his breath away. But more than her beauty, it was the strength and intelligence in her eyes that made him realize he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. "Samuel Morrison," she said, "I have been alone for 2 years, believing that my chance for happiness died with my first husband. But the spirits work in ways we do not always understand. They brought you to that trading post at exactly the right moment. They gave you the wisdom to treat me as a person worthy of choice. They guided us through dangers that could have destroyed us both. Is that a yes?" "That is yes to being your partner in building something new." "Yes, to helping you create a place where Apache children and white children can grow up together without fear. Yes, to spending my life helping you honor your brother's dream." Samuel reached out and took her hands in his. "And is that yes to something else as well?" "That is yes to whatever else the spirits have planned for us, together." The next morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, Samuel and Ayanna stood before Nalnish and Agent Henderson. In a ceremony that blended Apache traditions with legal necessities, Samuel was formally adopted into Ayanna's clan and married to her in the same moment. Captain Williams served as a witness, still somewhat amazed by how completely wrong his assumptions about the situation had been. "I came here to arrest Apache criminals," he said to Agent Henderson. "Instead, I'm watching a wedding and learning about mining company conspiracies. This country is stranger than I thought." "This country is changing," Henderson replied. "The question is whether we change with it or get left behind." 3 months later, Samuel and Ayanna stood on a ridge overlooking a valley in the Colorado mountains. Below them, construction was beginning on the buildings that would house the Sunrise Valley community, a place where Apache families could live in peace while learning the skills needed to prosper in the changing world. The land had been purchased with money Samuel made from selling information about Carlton Reed's illegal operations to competing mining companies. Reed himself was in prison, and his network of fake Apache raiders had been exposed and broken up. "It's going to be hard work," Samuel said, as they watched Apache and white workers laboring side by side to raise the frame of the first house. "All good things require hard work," Ayanna replied, "but we are not working alone." Indeed, they were not. Agent Henderson had taken a leave of absence from his government position to help establish the community. Chato had agreed to serve as a teacher and translator. Several Apache families had already committed to joining the experiment. And Thomas Morrison's dream of a place where different peoples could live together in mutual respect was finally becoming reality. As the sun set behind the mountains, Samuel and Ayanna walked hand in hand toward the camp where the workers were gathering for their evening meal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new bridges to build. But tonight, as they joined the circle around the fire where Apache stories mingled with cowboy ballads, where the future was being shaped by people who had learned to see past the barriers of race and culture, Samuel knew that his brother's legacy lived on. And at the heart of that legacy was the woman who had joined her strength to his, her wisdom to his determination, her people's future to his own. Together, they would write a new chapter in the story of the American West. Not a tale of conquest and division, but one of cooperation and shared hope. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had guided them through their journey from that dusty trading post to this mountain valley where dreams were becoming real. And in the firelight, Ayanna's face glowed with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found her place in the world and the partner worthy of sharing it. Their legacy would be measured not in gold or land or power, but in the children who would grow up in this valley believing that people of different backgrounds could work together to build something better than what they found. It would be measured in the bridges they built between worlds, in the walls they tore down, in the hope they kindled for future generations. As the fire burned low and the camp settled into sleep, Samuel and Ayanna remained by the glowing coals, planning the work that lay ahead. There would be setbacks and disappointments, conflicts and failures, but there would also be small victories, unexpected friendships, and moments of grace when the impossible became possible through the simple act of people choosing to trust each other. The mountains stood silent around them, ancient guardians of dreams both old and new. And in the valley below, the first buildings of Sunrise Valley Community rose toward the stars, solid proof that some legacies are too important to die with the men who first imagined them.